Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on Facebook Live. I'm Jessie Chen, the founder of Immigrants Shine. Today we have Arian Saeedfar. He lives in State College, Pennsylvania, and works as a research ops associate at Autodesk. Hi Arian, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jesse, for scheduling this interview.
Sure. I'm so excited to hear your immigrant success stories today. Would you like to do a quick self-introduction?
Sure. My name is Arian. I'm originally from Iran. I was born and raised in Iran, and I moved to the U.S. Around 6 years ago for grad school. I moved to Houston, Texas at first, and then after a while, I moved to Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Nice.
Yep.
Cool. Let's talk about your immigrant career experience. For undergrad, you studied architecture at Art University of Isfahan in Iran.
Yeah.
Then you moved to the US to study construction management for your master degree at the University of Houston in Texas, right?
Right. That's right.
Okay, and then you did some internship while in graduate school and took some part-time jobs after graduation and then a full-time job at Assemble System, which was later acquired by Autodesk. And that's where you're working now as a research ops associate. Can you walk us through your career journey and the challenges you went through before you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So it was kind of like quite a shift from architecture to where I am right now. So yeah, as you mentioned, I studied architecture in undergrad school. I worked for an architectural design firm back in Iran for a while. And then I actually had an admission for architecture in the US. So I came here. Some friends talked me out of it and just like, tried to convince me to switch to construction, which I kind of did. It was kind of a new world, just like sort of challenging, changing the majors, but I was happy at the end. And I was always fascinated by technology, and I did a lot of research in construction technology, and eventually joined Assemble Systems, which was a um, construction technology startup at the moment. And I sort of joined their research and development team, worked there for a while, and kind of moved towards a more customer-facing role as their lead technical support engineer. And yeah, again, like there were some challenges moving for the first time to a customer-facing role. I kind of like had a funny story there. The first customer call that I had was with a person. They had like a really thick Southern accent, and I could not understand a word they were talking about. And I was just like so nervous, and I didn't know what to do at that moment. So I just like pretended that the connection is not good, and I just like hung up the phone. And so yeah, that was my first call. And after that, I got some like mentorship from others in the company, how to handle those situations. And I kind of worked there a while, like a couple of years in the support organization. And then our company was acquired by Autodesk. Upon joining Autodesk, I worked, on the Assemble software for another year or so, kind of on a tier 2 support position. And then I applied for this position, which was, internal to Autodesk, and joined the team that I'm working with right now as a research ops associate. Yeah, that was kind of my, journey from architecture, like gradually moving to technology and to research.
Yeah, that was the funniest story. So instead of just cutting the line, what you mentioned that your company kind of coached you on what else you can do. Can you share what they taught you?
Yeah, so one of the things that they did was to kind of like set up like mock-up interviews or like calls with customers. So, for example, my colleague, a salesperson, would call me and pretend to be a customer and just like
Mhm.
some to just like get more confidence on how you save, like what are the things that you say first, what do you continue with, and if you don't like understand what the person is saying, it's okay to ask, like to repeat. So yeah, it
Right.
was like, yeah, it was like quite funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you talked about the language barrier challenge and how you overcame it, or how your company helped you to overcome that. So maybe not everyone knows what a research ops associate does. Can you do a quick walkthrough of what your workday looks like on a daily basis?
Sure. So my job is kind of to craft and create tools and processes needed for UX research. Like in short and in a sense, it's like designing products, but your clients are your own colleagues who want to do research. So it's just like sort of creating products and processes they need to make their job easier, and to like accelerate the speed of the research that they're doing in the company.
Yeah, that sounds like a very important role. Since your job is to help your research and development organization plan and execute user experience research, I'm sure your day-to-day job must involve a lot of communication. And this makes me wonder if you have faced similar language challenges at your current job.
So not as much as I did on the first job. I think kind of talking to your colleagues is just like more comfortable than
Mm,
talking to customers. So like a customer facing role is kind of like more challenging in that aspect.
mm,
And also like I think like over time you kind of understand how you can improve, and you get better over time. I remember like when I first moved to the US, I was like kind of translating every single sentence in my head before saying it in English. So
mm.
over time, you just like kind of, you know, uh, learn how to improvise and and how to, speak better.
Yeah. So would you say that's how the transition looks like for you? From you have to manually translate every sentence in your head first to kind of just naturally know what to say,
Yeah,
right?
that was kind of the journey for me.
Yeah. Do you feel like you can confidently say the language is no longer a blocker for you on any
Um,
given project?
I couldn't say it's no longer an issue. There are times that you just like think of something in your head and you just like say something, but like
Mhm.
the message that you convey to people and they just like elaborate on that, and you're like, that's not quite what I meant, but yeah. Yeah, I think like it takes a long time for that not to be a problem anymore, but I feel like a lot more comfortable than when I started my career in the US.
Mhm. Yeah. Speaking of language challenges, how about accent? Do you feel like that's a challenge for you? Because many immigrants out there, including myself, struggle with their accent ability in speaking English.
Yeah, so I kind of like I definitely have seen the accent as like kind of a barrier at some point, but I kind of think that everybody has an accent, right? So if you're born in the U.S., if you come from Boston, you might have a Boston accent. If you're born in Russia and you're trying to speak English, you might have a Russian accent. So I think it's not something to be ashamed of. It's definitely helps if you try to like improve your accent, depending on where you live. But I don't think it's something to be ashamed of. And especially as long as people understand what you're talking about, I think you're okay. Yeah, I kind of think that it also helps to hang out with people who acknowledge and understand you're coming from a different background and kind of celebrate that. So that's what I did when I moved to the US, and those people helped me a lot. They would just like understand that I cannot speak as fast as they can, or as good as they can. And another thing to remember is that never forget you're speaking more than one language. That's an advantage that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, for sure. And when you said those people helped you to to understand that you're not speaking a native language. Are you talking about Americans, or are you talking about other immigrants from different countries?
Yeah, kind of both. Like the people who were speaking better than me, especially Americans. So I had friends who just like, it might have took me a while to get the sentence out, but they would just like bear with me. No one made fun of me, and they would just like understand that I come from a different background and I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to get better. And also like faculty members and other people who would just acknowledge that.
Right. Yeah, and I'm curious if you have any advice for people who are looking into the research ops field. Anything you are looking to improve your skills furthermore.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of like an intersection of like research and operations, as its name says. Um, it's it's sometimes hard to think like a researcher. I think that the best bet or the best skill is to like educate yourself to think more like a researcher, think more critical. And on kind of on the operational side, I think like it's important, and that's what I'm trying to get better at, is to help strategically and like look at the bigger picture and try to understand what's going on and why you're doing the things that you're doing to just like kind of improve. And yeah, I think these are I myself, I didn't go to school for UX research, and there were a lot of things that I had to learn on my own or rely on others or my colleagues, my managers to learn about. So it's kind of like an intersection of like um, strategic thinking and thinking about the bigger picture, how you want to improve the processes, and also still like you need to understand what research is and how especially like user researchers are looking at the problems.
Right. Can you elaborate more on the strategic thinking part? What do you plan on doing to get better at it?
Yeah, so I sort of like there are daily tasks that you do, and at the same time you kind of like do those daily tasks to get somewhere, right? Strategic thinking is like, for me, it's just like kind of understanding more where do you want to get in a longer run, and what are the things that you need to consider to get to those goals. So kind of like having to being able to look at the bigger picture of why you're doing the things that are defined as daily tasks to you, and kind of being able to define where do you want to be, for example, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, and how this vision can help your company and your career.
Right. Yeah, that's super great. Let's switch gears and talk about immigration visas for a little bit. We all
Sure.
know that, yeah, so we have been working from home for how long? 3 months now.
Right.
We all know that the pandemic has caused many outstanding issues across the world. And
Hmm.
for America in particular, back in April, Trump said he will issue an executive order suspending immigration. Many people who are in the progress of getting their green cards or citizenship freaked out because it was so unclear who would be impacted by that order. How did you react when you read that news? What are your thoughts on Trump's executive order suspending immigration?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we are without getting too political, but unfortunately, I think we are at a point that I cannot say anymore that I was shocked. Yeah, I was definitely worried about myself, my situation, my immigration applications, and yeah, I just like kind of were like sad and angry about all the uncertain times and things that this administration is imposing on immigrants. Yeah, not to mention like all the racial injustice that is going on, and the Americans are fighting for, which kind of makes me think that we definitely need to have more conversations. We need to learn about each other's cultures. We need to understand that we are different. We are coming from different backgrounds. We are from different races. We might speak different languages, but we are all different. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't or we cannot get along.
Right. Yes, I totally agree with you. It's so important to recognize one another's contribution to the country and be nice to each other. Do
That's
you
right.
have any thoughts on how can immigrants better expose their contribution and win respect for themselves?
I think, like, first of all, they don't have anything to prove, but at the same time, I think like having conversations, especially with those who have not been exposed to a lot of immigrants, would help a lot. So there are many people who have not had the chance to like hang out with people from different cultures and backgrounds, and I think having conversations both for like immigrants and for both for like also for people of like different races would help to like understand the differences that we have and kind of accept the differences.
Right. Yeah. Um, Now I'm curious about your experience potentially living in different places because you primarily live in Pennsylvania, right?
That's right.
But your headquarter office is in San Francisco, California. So before the pandemic, you used to travel to San Francisco every once in a while. Do you experience any difference as an immigrant in, say, these two different places?
Um, yeah, somehow I kind of think that people like in San Francisco and usually like generally in larger cities, they're more open to initiate conversations with you.
Mhm.
So that's kind of one of the differences that I kind of like experienced. And I have been like maybe lucky enough not to have like any confrontation, immigration related confrontation. But yeah, I think like that would be the biggest difference. Like and something that is probably not related to the cities, and it's more related to how much the people have like been exposed to immigrants from other backgrounds. It's kind of like the questions that they ask. So
Mhm.
sometimes I just like start conversations with people. For example, let's say I'm at a bar or somewhere. When the first question is that where are you from, I kind of like understand that this is going to be a different conversation from like a person that is trying to like get to me personally, and not the first thing that is asking me is where I'm from. So I kind of I'm from a country that has like a specific notion, and some people might have like specific perspectives about that. So it's not something that I'm ashamed of, but it's something that sometimes um, I do not want the image that those people have from my country to be the first thing that they know about me. So it sort of like sometimes feel like that if it's the first question, I'm being judged. But if you're asking me other personal questions, and then maybe one of the questions, as out of curiosity, is that where I'm from, I think I'm more comfortable with that.
Yeah, to follow up with that, how do you respond to people when they ask when they keep asking you where you're from, and when they ask you distress questions about Iran? You'll just think about depends on the question
Yeah,
and whether or not it will be judged. You're saying?
yeah, it's kind of like you kind of know where like how the other person is feeling when you're saying you're from Iran. A lot of them, mm, they really want to learn. They want to know what's going on in there. They want to know why it's being portrayed the way it is in the media.
Mm,
But a lot of them would just like kind of judge you, and they would just like they have certain things on their mind, you know, um, about like being an Iranian, and they just like start judging you, and that's where like I usually try to get out of the conversation. I'm like very happy to like have conversation, and as I mentioned, I think it's very important for all of us to have these conversations and learn about each other's cultures better. But it kind
Right.
of depends on the intentions of the person you're talking with. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It can be very difficult to balance. And it
Yeah.
really depends on, as you said, people's intention. And to me, I think also education background. And sometimes we might just call it unconscious bias,
Yeah.
really pronounce
That's right.
that word. So you talked about your own challenges. What about the challenges that other Iranian immigrants would face in the US? In your opinion, do you think there's any difference in challenges for Iranian immigrants in comparison to immigrants from other countries?
So I would say that definitely, all immigrants they have their own challenges, especially during this time in the U.S. But I think like there are a lot of discriminations, mostly by the system and the administration against Iranians. To name a few, the Iranian grad students usually are given single entry visas, or if they're given multiple entry visas, they're like for shorter periods comparing to other ones, and not to mention the travel ban. The only way that you can get a visa right now is that if you're a student or a researcher. And also, like, for example, if you get other kinds of visas or statuses in the US, like H-1B or work visa, and if you leave the United States, it's almost impossible for you to get a visa and come back. And, going back to the travel ban, it's like separating a lot of families. A lot of students cannot see their parents, and you kind of like hear a lot of like sad stories, just to name a couple of them. There are a lot of families that are looking for more creative ways to just like being able to see the student. Let's say that you're a PhD student, or you're someone who hasn't gotten your green card, and you want to meet your parents. It's kind of like impossible right now. For me, it's been more than 5 years that I haven't seen my parents or my family. But
5 years.
yeah, 5 years. So there are like stories. For example, there's a library in Vermont, or there's a park near Seattle called Peace Arch Park, I guess, where you can go from the American side. Your parents can go to Canada and enter the library or the park from the Canadian side. During the day, you hang out, you talk, you spend time together. But like in the evening, you need to go back to the American side, and your family needs to go back to the Canadian side. So it's kind of like the only way that is possible for like a lot of people, a lot of students especially, to like visit their parents and visit their loved ones. And there are also like stories that the officers at the border that know the intentions of the people entering the library and the park, who are not like treating them very well, and they're not just like accepting the fact that it's the only way they have to kind of meet. And yeah, so a lot of stories like this, and a lot of like hardships that are like unique to Iranians and also immigrants from a few other countries.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. It's so heartbreaking to hear stories like this. And thank you for being so honest in sharing these struggles with us. It's very unfortunate that I think Iran and the Iranians are portrayed very differently in the Western media, and which I think that's one of the reasons that caused discriminations. And there's so much that we can educate people on, like the cultural differences and the complicated history. No person should be treated fairly because of the stereotypes or be the victims of political games.
Definitely.
Um, so you mentioned you haven't seen your parents for 5 years. Did you mean that you just were not able to go home to visit? Or did you mean you were not able to go to like the border library or the Peace Arc Mark that you mentioned where
Um, yeah,
them?
so I myself, because of my visa situation, if I leave the United States, it's like unlikely to get a visa back.
Right.
And my parents, because of the travel ban, they cannot get US visa. So yeah, so the only way would have been just like to do something like the library or the park, but it's at the same times like it's heartwarming to see your family, but like the context or like the environment when you're visiting your family is also important. So I
Mm,
myself, I do not like find it very um, you know very likely to accept the fact that I just like meet my parent a few hours a day in a park or a library. So yeah, that's why I didn't go for it.
right. So you'd rather not do that and
Yeah,
just wait
but
for
definitely, yeah,
a perfect day to reunion. Okay.
yes.
So throughout the conversation, you mentioned the words culture a few times. So let's talk about it. What is the culture like in Iran? Are there any major cultural differences between the US and Iran that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so Iran is a very complicated country. There are a lot of also like difficulties that the Iranian government is imposing on its people. So there are a lot of things you're not allowed to, do in public. You need to do them in private. There are a lot of like pressures. A lot of freedoms are not the same as the U.S. And people like there are a lot of contrasts. People, some of them are like agree with the government. Some of them, are opposing the government a lot. And some of them, want to stick to the traditions. And the younger generation, the urban younger generation, are like more trying to like adapt the Western culture.
Mm,
So I would say like from a perspective, there are a lot of cultural differences, but at the same time, um, unlike a lot of things that are portrayed in the media, the day-to-day life for a lot of people is not like much different. People like go to work, people have access to all the technologies and gadgets and everything that people are using here. Um, and again, like accessing to like films and series or a lot of things, people find a way to access them. They're not always easy to access, but people find a way to access them. They watch a lot of series and movies that people watch here in the US. um, there are some cultural differences, but I wouldn't say that when I moved from Iran to the US, I had a cultural shock. I don't say that. It's probably different for different people. As I mentioned, there are like different groups of people with different beliefs in Iran, but that has been my experience.
right. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? Because you mentioned some people in Iran are adapting to the Western culture, but some others are still sticking to their traditional and religious culture. Is so would you say there's still not much of culture difference at all, even for those people who are more religious?
Yeah, there's actually for them, so that's why I'm mentioning it's kind of like sort of complicated.
Mm,
So if you're a young person, your day-to-day life is just like you go to work or you go to university, hang out with
mm,
your friends. If you want to see a movie, you have your movie. If like even if you want to like get access to like some beverages that might be legal based on the rules of country, you'll find a way to do that. If you want to dress, like in a certain way, there are things you can do. So a lot of people might not agree, but that's where the complexities begin. So it's kind of like we have people from both sides. So there are things that you need to like comply with from a government standpoint, but to the point that you can do this, a lot of people would just like try to adapt to Western culture, and a lot of them are opposed to that. So yeah, there are a lot of contrasts and complexities.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying for me.
Great.
Yeah, what are something you are proud of the most being an Iranian?
I think just like getting close to people is very easy in our culture. So I really like the help that you can get from your friends and your family, and that's very valuable for me, and that's part of the culture that I really like.
Yeah, that's probably one of my own favorite culture too. Similar in China, where it's very normal to have a big family where everyone helps out each other when you need a hand, and even to some extent, it can be even feel like the obligation. So
Right.
there is this pros and cons, and also in the U.S., I certainly also don't feel the same here, and I think that's because Americans are taught to be independent from a young age, which also has its pros and cons. and and that's also why to me, it feels a little difficult to get to know people on a personal level. I'm not sure if you feel the same.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah.
So I want to talk about I want to talk a bit more about your challenges. So being away from families for 5 years now, and it just seems very heartbreaking for me. I can't imagine not seeing my parents for 5 years. This makes me believe there must be something that deeply supports you when you go through hard times. What would you say is your biggest strength as an immigrant? What are you proud of yourself the most?
I think as an immigrant, you kind of like learn to be more resilient towards the situation that are imposed to you. And yeah, it's like there a lot of things have happened to me and to all the immigrants and to like the Iranian immigrants during the past few years that I didn't sign up for. But you cannot always predict how these things go. And so yeah, it just like kind of taught me to fight for my goals and just be more resilient. And like the different minorities, they have different challenges of different magnitude. But like being an immigrant, it just like gives you the experience of being part of a minority. And yeah, I think that's also very valuable to have to experience that.
Yeah, for sure. That was such a great answer. And hey, it seems like resilience is a pretty shared strength across many immigrants. It definitely took me quite a long time to recognize that's something I have too. And I really hope stories like yours will help others discover their inner superpower much, much faster. I don't know how long it took you to realize, hey, I have this really strong superpower inside of me called the resilience.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of agree, and I hope like all the people could be more resilient and fight towards the challenging, because that's the reality of living as an immigrant.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your stories today. This is so wonderful. I've learned a lot today, learned more about your stories and about your country as well. Um, yeah, I'm just really grateful for how open-minded you are in sharing your struggles and the extra challenges Iranian immigrants face in general. And I hope more people out there will um, look at the stereotypes in a different way, like try to read more books or TV shows about history. I don't know. I really don't know what's the best way to educate people on all these complicated histories.
Yeah, I would say thank you for providing this platform, and I think yeah, like having conversations with people, it's the best way to educate ourselves. Yeah.
Educate ourselves and share those stories and to inspire others.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Thanks.
all the wonderful insight and advice you shared today. I'm really glad we got the opportunity to chat.
Thank you. Me too. And again, thanks for scheduling this and giving me this platform to share my stories.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful Sunday.
Thanks. You too.
Yeah. Okay,
Bye.
bye.